Hello, dreamers, and welcome to Dreaming Isle. I'm here to guide you into a calm and magical place tonight. Before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. It helps bring more dreamers to our little corner of the stars. And if you'd like, share in the comments. What's the world outside your window like right now? Now, find your cozy spot. Let go of the day, and let the story begin. Whispers of the Ember Veil, Part 1. The Girl Who Watched the Sky. There is a place where the sun has long forgotten how to rise. The sky hangs forever in twilight, not day, not night, just a soft wash of lavender and ember light, where stars blink faintly and clouds glow from within like sleeping embers. This place is known as the Ember Veil, and in the quiet village of Lorien, nestled at the edge of a mirror lake, there lived a girl named Senna who watched the sky more than she spoke. While others tended glowvine gardens or strung lanterns through the breeze paths, Senna would sit on the wind-worn steps of the old observatory, sketching with a piece of pale coal in the margins of her mother's old journal. She was searching, not for stars, they barely moved anymore, but for something her grandmother used to whisper about. The first light, a warmth that once swept across the sky and stirred the bones of the world awake. A golden fire that rose and fell. A thing called the sun. No one in the village believed it had ever existed. A story for children, they'd say. There's only dusk, and always will be. But Senna had seen something. 3 nights before, as the lake lay still and her fingers grew numb from drawing, a flicker had cut through the sky's dull haze, not orange, not violet, but gold. A thread of light, vanishing in an instant. Real. Impossible. And now, something within her had shifted. That morning, if one could call it that, Senna packed a satchel, a cloak, a compass, a scrap of bread, her grandmother's journal. And with one last glance at the unmoving sky, she stepped beyond the lantern posts. Into the quiet. Into the veil. Part 2. The Path Beneath the Still Leaves. The forest just beyond the village was called Mirenholt, and it had not rustled in over 100 years. Its trees stood frozen in place, tall, pale-limbed things with leaves like paper lanterns. The wind, it was said, had abandoned Mirenholt the day the sky ceased to turn. Birds no longer nested there. Even the light beneath its canopy felt thinner, cautious. Senna moved slowly. Her footsteps were nearly silent on the moss-soft ground. She carried her lantern low, the flame inside fed by shimmer oil. It cast long, gentle shadows across trunks etched with old glyphs, markings from a time when travelers still passed this way. She paused near a leaning stone. At its base, nestled among roots, sat a faded trail marker, a carved crescent moon with a notch at its center. The Path of Dreamers. She traced the symbol with her thumb. Her grandmother had spoken of it in murmurs, a forgotten route once walked by those who believed the sun might return. A path that led through twilight, towards something older than the veil itself. Senna stepped past the stone. Around her, the trees did not sway. The silence pressed in, thick and steady. But it was not empty. It listened. She followed the faint trail, winding deeper, until the lantern's glow caught on something strange ahead, a single leaf, drifting down. Moving. Not still. It twirled once before landing at her feet, and Senna felt a shiver run through her. The forest had moved. The leaves had stirred, and the path was waking up. Part 3. The Whisperroot Lantern. The leaf lay still at Senna's feet, pale and glowing faintly along its edges like the memory of light. She knelt beside it, fingertips brushing its surface. It was warm, not alive, exactly, but aware. Something old stirred beneath the forest floor, and Senna could feel it pulsing through her boots like a heartbeat buried in stone. She raised her lantern higher. Ahead, the trail dipped into a shallow hollow where twisted roots wove across the ground like sleeping serpents. In the center stood an old post, half swallowed by moss, and from it hung a second lantern, smaller than hers, its frame cracked, its flame long extinguished. But etched into its base were runes Senna recognized. Whisper it. Her grandmother's stories returned to her in fragments. Lanterns that once burned with more than fire. Lights that remembered voices. Flames that listened and passed stories from one bearer to another. Whisperroots, they were called, left behind by twilight walkers on ancient trails. Senna touched the cold glass of the lantern's belly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a flicker. A pale blue flame sparked to life within the broken lantern, dancing without heat or smoke. The air around her trembled, not with sound, but with memory. A voice filled her ears, not loud, not near. Keep west where the bark turns silver. The wind may sleep, but the veil forgets nothing. Then silence. The flame blinked out. Senna's fingers trembled. This was real. The flame. The voice. The path itself, responding. She looked ahead. To the west, one of the tree trunks shimmered faintly, silver beneath its bark, and she stepped toward it. Part 4. The memory that followed. The tree with silver bark shimmered gently in the twilight, as if lit from within by some hidden moon. Senna approached it slowly, one hand on her lantern, the other brushing the smooth, pale surface of the trunk. Her touch left no mark, but something beneath her skin tingled, as though the tree had noticed her. She stepped past it. The forest grew narrower here, the path tight between leaning trees and curtains of whisper moss that shifted ever so slightly, though no breeze stirred them. And then the sound. A footstep. Not hers. She turned quickly, raising the lantern. Its glow cast long shadows across the trees, but revealed no figure. Just the stillness. Another step. Closer this time. Light. Deliberate. Who's there? Senna whispered. Silence. Then, a voice, barely audible, as if spoken from behind a curtain of wind. You saw the light. Senna's heart beat faster. What are you? The voice did not reply. Instead, it moved, circling, never seen, never fully real. It was not threatening, but not welcoming either. It felt like a memory, the echo of someone who had once walked the path and had not finished the journey, and it was following her. She turned and kept walking. The presence drifted behind, never touching, never retreating. A companion made of lost moments. Senna understood then. The path did not only lead her forward, it brought things with her, and some memories did not like to be left behind. Part 5. The sky that tried to change. The trees began to thin. Senna stepped out from the tight clutch of Mirren Holt and onto a rise of soft stone, where the moss peeled back and the sky stretched wide above her. The twilight, as always, was there, endless hues of violet, blue, and faint ember light brushing the underbellies of drifting clouds. But something was different. The clouds were moving, not fast, not in any wind she could feel, but drifting with purpose, like ripples stirred by something far below. Senna tilted her head. The clouds had never moved before, and beyond them, for just a moment, the haze above shimmered. A streak of brightness, like gold behind silk. It faded quickly, but not before her breath caught. It was the same kind of light she had seen 3 nights ago, the same impossible color. She felt a pressure behind her eyes, like someone whispering without words. Not a voice this time, but an urge, a direction. The sky was trying to tell her something. She opened her grandmother's journal and flipped to a page half worn from handling. A sketch of a tall spire rising above mist, drawn in gold ink. Beneath it, when the sky stirs, the spire waits. The spire. She had always believed it a dream, a story. Now she wasn't so sure. Behind her, the presence still followed, quiet, unseen, yet watching. And ahead, just visible on the far horizon where forest met mountain, a faint peak stood tall against the endless dusk. She closed the book and walked toward it. Part 6. The Hill of Listening Stones. The trail bent gently uphill, winding through a stretch of pale meadow where the grass swayed despite the windless air. Each blade glowed faintly at the tip, as if collecting twilight like dew. At the top of the rise, Senna found the stones. There were dozens of them, scattered in a loose circle, worn smooth by time. Some stood upright, others leaned together like sleeping figures. And carved into each one was a small hollow, no wider than a thumbprint. She stepped carefully among them, feeling the weight of the silence shift. Her lantern dimmed slightly. Then, as she passed the largest of the stones, she heard it. A breath, not her own. The stone exhaled. It was not a sound of warning or welcome. It was the kind of breath someone takes before they speak, or before they remember. Senna knelt beside it, placing her palm on the cool surface. The hollow glowed faintly, and a voice filled the air, soft, layered, distant. Even now, we wait. The other stones began to whisper too, each with a different voice. Some sad, some curious, some just a wordless hum. It was overwhelming, but not frightening. The stones were listening and had been, for a very long time. And now, they were beginning to speak again. Senna stood and turned slowly within the circle. Each voice faded as she passed, until she stood once more in the center. The windless grass stirred. She whispered, "I'm listening too." And the last stone fell silent. But the presence behind her did not. It moved closer. Part 7. The Stranger Made of Mist. Senna turned, heart thudding. The presence that had followed her since the forest no longer hid in silence. It stood at the edge of the stone circle, a tall, robed figure, its face shrouded in a veil of silver mist that drifted slowly across its form. It did not step forward. It simply stood, waiting. Senna raised her lantern. The light cast a warm glow over the stones, and for a moment, the mist parted just enough for her to glimpse eyes, not glowing, not human, but ancient. Soft as smoke, deep as memory. "You are not the first to walk the veil," the figure said. Its voice was quiet and distant, like it was speaking across water. "I know," Senna replied, "but I might be the last." The figure tilted its head, and the mist around it thickened briefly. "You saw the change in the sky." Senna nodded. "It is stirring," the figure whispered, "and if it wakes too soon, the world will forget how to sleep." "What does that mean?" But the mist only swirled in response. The figure raised a hand, palm outward. From the fog, a thread of blue light wove toward her lantern. It touched the glass gently, not to harm, but to mark. The flame within shifted, now pulsing with a faint shimmer of dusk blue at its edges. "When the time comes," the figure said, "this light will guide you across the place where no path holds shape." Senna opened her mouth to ask more, but the mist was already unraveling. The figure dissolved into the air like breath in winter, and she was alone once more, except for the flame, now changed. Part 8. The Bridge That Wasn't There. The path narrowed as Senna moved on, winding into the hills where the earth grew uneven and the stones were flecked with threads of crystal light. Her lantern, now pulsing with a quiet blue shimmer, seemed to pull her gently forward, its glow leaning slightly to one side whenever she hesitated. The spire, though still distant, had grown clearer, a jagged silhouette against the velvet sky, its base lost in a sea of drifting mist. Then, the ground ended. She reached the edge of a vast ravine, wide, black, and empty. On the other side, the trail continued, but there was no bridge. Senna stood at the cliff's edge, the silence around her stretching deeper than before. She looked down, but saw nothing. No floor, no bottom, only mist, swirling softly as though breathing. She stepped back. The lantern flickered. A thin strand of blue light drifted from its flame and arched toward the open air. Then another, and another. Slowly, a pattern began to form. Faint, glowing lines sketching themselves across the void. A bridge, or something like one, not made of stone or wood, but of memory, of dusklight. Senna took a breath and stepped forward. The first strand held. It felt like stepping on still water. Then the next, and the next. The air was silent, the bridge invisible beneath her feet, except for the shimmer trailing from the lantern's glow. She didn't look down, only forward, and when she reached the other side, the blue light faded. The bridge was gone. Part 9. The garden with no roots. Beyond the ravine, the land grew stranger. The earth no longer felt solid beneath Senna's boots. It was soft, almost buoyant, like walking across the surface of a deep dream. The air shimmered faintly with colors that weren't quite colors, more like feelings given form. Then the path opened into a clearing. At its center floated a garden, not planted in soil, but suspended in air, vines and blossoms drifting in lazy spirals, their stems glowing with pale twilight. Roots dangled beneath them like long threads, but touched nothing. Each flower turned as she entered, their petals unfurled without breeze. The largest blossom, a silver-blue trumpet-shaped bloom, hovered near her shoulder and gave off a gentle chime, like wind across glass. Senna paused. The lantern in her hand pulsed softly, and the blue shimmer at its core reached out toward the garden, not to burn, but to connect. The flowers responded. Dozens of them turned, rising gently into a circular pattern above her. Their colors deepened, from twilight gray to soft ember gold. Then, from within their glow, came a faint hum. A song. Not one Senna had heard before, but one that felt remembered. She stood still and listened. The song wasn't for her. It was about her. About a girl who watched the sky and believed in something everyone else had forgotten. The song faded. The flowers folded inward. And in their place, hanging from a ribbon of root, appeared a pendant, a crystal tear filled with flickering golden light. Senna took it. It was warm. The garden drifted slowly away, and the path ahead cleared. Part 10. The clock without time. Senna followed the path into a hollow shaped like a bowl, its edges lined with weathered stone columns half swallowed by moss. The air here was heavy, still thick with the song of the rootless garden. In the center of the hollow stood a strange mechanism. It was a clock, or something close to one. Circular, vast, and made of aged brass that pulsed faintly with inner glow. Dozens of rings rotated silently around a dark core, etched with runes too old to read. There were no hands, no numbers, just motion. And yet, it felt important. Senna stepped closer. The lantern's light brightened as she approached, casting thin lines of blue across the rings. The pendant around her neck pulsed once, syncing with the rhythm of the turning metal. She placed her palm on the edge of the clock. It stopped. Everything went still. Even the distant hum of the veil seemed to hush. Then, slowly, the rings reversed their spin. Sparks of gold rose from the center like dust. And in the space between the rings, images bloomed. Glimpses of faces, mountains, skies that shifted from dusk to dawn. The clock was not measuring time. It was remembering it. Senna watched as the images flickered past. A child holding a sun-shaped flower, a ship sailing on clouds, a great tree opening its petals to a rising light. Then a final image, a narrow staircase carved into twilight stone, spiraling up into a tower that touched the sky. The spire. The ring stopped. A single rune at the center glowed, a direction, unspoken but clear. Senna stepped back. The clock had given her the way. Part 11. The tower made of sky. The path narrowed once more, this time climbing. Twilight stones gave way to steps not carved by hand, but grown, as if the earth itself had once dreamed of stairs. They spiraled gently upward, wrapping around the side of a great ridge, until the world below fell into haze. And then Senna saw it. The spire. It stood at the summit, taller than she'd imagined. Its surface shimmered like liquid glass, reflecting no sky, no clouds, only light that moved from within. It had no doors, no windows, only a single seam, rising from base to tip. She stepped forward. Her lantern pulsed again, and the pendant around her neck warmed, golden light flickering from within. The seam in the spire split open without sound, parting just wide enough to let her pass. Inside, it was quiet. Not silent, just still, like the inside of a held breath. The air shimmered. Pillars rose along the circular walls, each carved with scenes she did not recognize. Suns rising and falling, trees with wings, moons breaking into feathers. In the center of the chamber floated a sphere. Not solid, not flame, something between the two. It pulsed with gentle rhythm, like a heart, and Senna stepped toward it as if drawn by a song only she could hear. When she was close enough, the sphere whispered, not in words, in memories, a single, shared understanding. Everything waits to be remembered. The sphere opened, and the light within washed over her. Part 12. The Memory of Dawn. Light surrounded her. Not bright, not blinding, but deep. A warmth that pressed gently against her skin and slipped into her lungs with every breath. It felt like being wrapped in every sunrise the world had ever forgotten. Senna closed her eyes and saw everything, not with vision, but with memory. A great sun rising over a sea of crystal leaves. Children laughing in a world that knew day and night. The Ember Veil as it once was, not trapped in twilight, but held gently between light and dark, always shifting, always breathing. And then, the breaking. Not a war, not a curse, just a choice. To forget. To protect the fragile beauty of twilight by letting go of the flame that moved the sky. Senna saw the ones who made that choice, tall, luminous beings woven from dusk and wind. They had sealed away the day so the world would never burn again. But in doing so, they had silenced the song of change. Senna reached toward the memory, and the sphere answered. It opened fully, revealing a single fragment, a glowing ember, small as a breath, resting in the center like a heart held in sleep. The first dawn, not gone, only waiting. Waiting for someone who remembered enough to carry it. Senna reached out, and the ember rose to meet her hand. It did not burn. It pulsed once, and nestled into her chest. Part 13. The Flame Beneath the Veil. The ember settled into Senna's chest like a long-lost puzzle piece. Warm, weightless, alive. Her breath caught, not from pain, but from knowing. She could feel it pulsing softly with her heartbeat, not separate from her, but part of her. A quiet rhythm, the forgotten cadence of morning. The spire began to change. Its walls shimmered, shedding their mirrored skin to reveal a hidden weave of symbols and flowing light. The glyphs pulsed in sequence, echoing the glow within Senna. It was reacting, recognizing. And outside, though she could not see it, the sky shifted. Clouds parted for the first time in an age, not fully, but just enough to let something through. The faintest thread of true gold, thin as breath, soft as memory. Senna stepped toward the edge of the spire's inner circle. A path unfolded beneath her feet, rising gently toward an opening that hadn't been there before. A circular frame of pure dusk light, leading outward. Her lantern flared once, then dimmed. It had given what it could. Now the flame was hers to carry. As she stepped through the arch, the wind returned. The first breeze she had ever truly felt. It wrapped around her shoulders like a voice from long ago, whispering nothing and everything all at once. The sky didn't break. It bent and welcomed her forward. Part 14. The echo that waited in the wind. The wind guided her gently. It wasn't loud, nor strong, more like a current of intention, nudging Senna across a narrow ridge of dusk stone that curled along the mountainside like a serpent in sleep. Above, the sky shimmered in colors she had no names for, hues that shifted with her thoughts, brightening with each step forward. The ember in her chest pulsed in time with her movement. As she walked, she began to hear a sound on the air, not a song, not a word. More like a memory, repeated just out of reach. A sound that tugged at the corners of her awareness like a forgotten name. She stopped. The wind circled her ankles, then lifted her hair in a soft spiral. From ahead, near the cliff's edge, something moved. Not a shadow, not a figure. An echo. It shimmered faintly, the outline of a person, flickering like light on water. As she drew near, it solidified just enough to be seen clearly. An older woman, her eyes closed, her hands folded over a small lantern. Senna's breath caught. It was her grandmother. Not in body, but in memory. The echo opened its eyes and smiled. "You brought it farther than I ever could," the voice said, layered and distant. "I followed your book. Senna whispered. No, the echo replied. You followed the light I could only remember. The wind swirled once more. The echo leaned forward and placed a hand over Senna's chest. The ember pulsed, and for the first time, the wind carried her grandmother's voice. Keep going. Then the echo faded, but its warmth did not. Part 15. The door that wasn't locked. Senna descended from the ridge, her steps light, her heart steadied by the echo that still lingered like warmth in her chest. The path ahead curved through a grove of dusk willows, their branches trailing silver threads that shimmered like falling rain. At the center of the grove stood a structure she hadn't expected. A door. Freestanding. No walls. No roof. Just a tall archway of carved stone, its surface etched with looping symbols and spirals too intricate to fully follow. It should have been a ruin, but it felt like a beginning. Senna stepped closer. The space beyond the arch shimmered, the way hot air dances over still water. She reached out, not to push, not to open, but simply to touch. Her fingers passed through the shimmer. It wasn't a barrier. It was an invitation. She stepped forward. The air changed the moment she crossed the threshold. Cooler, more resonant, as though sound itself had grown deeper. The forest behind her remained visible, but distant now, as if seen through fogged glass. She turned. The door was still there, open. Still not locked. But she knew the way back was no longer meant for her. Some paths stay open only long enough to be chosen. And now she had. The shimmer behind her dimmed. The grove fell silent. And ahead, the world shifted again. Part 16. The Garden of Sleeping Voices. Beyond the doorway, the ground gave way to soft soil that glowed with a faint lavender hue. Strange plants grew here, not trees or flowers, but tall stalks that curled like question marks, their tips capped with closed, bell-shaped blooms. They didn't move. They didn't breathe, but Senna could feel them listening. She stepped carefully among them, her boots sinking slightly into the warm, mossy ground. The air buzzed faintly, not with insects or wind, but with the hush of thousands of unspoken thoughts. This was a garden, yes, but one that held voices instead of petals. Senna paused beside one of the stalks and reached toward the bloom. The lantern at her side flared softly, and the flower opened. Inside was not a seed, nor a scent, but a sound. A whisper, a child's laugh. She gasped, and the bloom closed. Another nearby unfurled of its own accord. A lullaby in a language she didn't know poured out like mist, then faded. These were not just flowers. They were memories. Pieces of lives once lived, dreams once dreamt, planted and left here to sleep until someone cared to listen. Senna wandered deeper, letting the voices guide her. Some were joyful, some brought tears, but none were empty. Each one, no matter how faint, hummed in tune with the ember in her chest. She was not here to take. She was here to remember, and in doing so, she felt something shift, not in the garden, but within herself. Part 17. The Archive Beneath the Leaves. At the far edge of the garden, where the listening stalks thinned and the light deepened to a shade between dusk and dream, Senna found a hollow in the ground, round, framed in woven root, and covered by a veil of thin, golden leaves. She brushed them aside gently. A soft staircase curved downward beneath the earth, lit by orbs of slow-turning light that hovered in the air like resting stars. The scent was warm, old parchment, pressed flowers, and something like memory. This was not a tunnel. It was an archive. She descended slowly, each step echoing quietly beneath her feet. The deeper she went, the more the silence thickened, not as a threat, but as a presence. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a vast chamber. Walls of bark and crystal shelves circled outward like a spiral. And floating in the center of the room were dozens, maybe hundreds, of glowing threads, each one winding between tiny glass vessels, bound books, folded notes. Senna approached one. The lantern glowed as she neared, and the thread curled inward toward her fingertips. A voice emerged from it, not out loud, but within. Day 1. I saw the edge of the sun. A whisper. A beginning. She turned to another. I wrote this down because I was afraid no one would remember. Another. If you find this, it means we didn't lose. Senna closed her eyes. This wasn't just a library. It was a vault of hope. She placed her journal on a nearby pedestal. The threads reached out to welcome it. Part 18. The light that needed no flame. As Senna stepped away from the pedestal, the threads around her pulsed in quiet rhythm, weaving briefly around her lantern before drifting back into the shelves like fireflies in thought. The ember within her chest grew warmer. Not burning, not flickering, just present. She passed through the inner ring of the archive, following a faint glow that pulsed behind a curtain of hanging ivy. There, resting on a platform shaped like a blooming spiral, sat a simple object. A lamp with no fuel, no wick, no flame. Just a hollow shell, carved from dusk glass, shaped like a half-closed eye. Senna approached and knelt before it. As her hand hovered near the edge, the ember in her chest pulsed once. The lamp responded. A line of golden light drew itself along the rim, circling slowly until the entire vessel glowed with a quiet, steady hum. No fire, just memory. And yet the room brightened. A warm light filled the chamber, not bright enough to blind, but deep enough to touch the shadows. It was a light that did not push darkness away, but welcomed it gently. The thread shimmered in response. Senna looked down at her own hands. They glowed faintly now, not from the lamp, but from something inside her waking up. This was a light born of choice, not need. The kind of light that could not be stolen, only offered. And in that moment, she understood. She was no longer carrying the lantern. She was one. Part 19. The staircase woven from stars. Senna left the archive with no book, no relic, no map. She carried only the ember light within her, soft and steady, lighting the air around her with each breath. Outside, the twilight had shifted again. The clouds had pulled back just a little farther, revealing threads of gold and deep violet stretching across the heavens. Stars blinked faintly overhead, not scattered, but moving, aligning, drawing shapes too large to grasp all at once. Ahead, the earth curved upward into a hill that shimmered at its peak. As she crested the rise, she saw it. A staircase of starlight, coiling upward into the open air. It hovered above the ground, each step made of gentle light, thin as mist, strong as memory. It didn't seem to lead to anything, and yet it pulled at her. Senna stepped onto the first stair. It held, then the second. As she climbed, the world below grew quieter. The garden, the grove, even the mountains melted into soft haze. The air was cool, but not cold, still, but not empty. It felt like walking into a dream you'd had long ago and only just remembered. Halfway up, she paused. The sky stretched endlessly above her now. A single star hovered just beyond the highest step, pulsing with soft rhythm, not a sun, but perhaps the idea of one. Not brightness, but invitation. Senna climbed, and with each step, the ember inside her burned just a little brighter. Part 20. Where the sky remembers her name. The final step of the staircase was weightless beneath her feet. Senna stood still, suspended high above the twilight world. No railings, no path ahead, only the vastness of the sky wrapped in silks of rose and indigo, slowly shifting in hue like the breath of some slumbering giant. She was surrounded by stars, not far-off lights, but close, drifting gently around her like lanterns on invisible strings. Some blinked, some pulsed. One hovered directly before her and whispered, "Senna." She didn't flinch. The voice was not outside her, but within, like a memory returning to its place. The star before her shone brighter for a moment, then folded in on itself, revealing a thread of light that circled slowly around her hands. "You are not the first to climb," the voice said, "but you are the first to carry the flame this far." Senna said nothing. She didn't have to. The sky knew her now. It remembered her. Another star pulsed nearby and sent out a ripple, a hum that passed through her like a bell's echo underwater. Her chest answered, the ember responding in kind, no longer just warm, but awake. I thought I came to find the sun, Senna whispered aloud. You came to remind the sky it had won, the voice answered. And with those words, the stars began to move, not falling, not fleeing, but forming something around her. Something new, something ancient. Part 21. The shape of the forgotten flame. The stars circled her slowly, dozens, then hundreds, moving with the grace of memory and the patience of time. They gathered above her, weaving into lines and curves, forming a shape she couldn't name, not with words, but with understanding. It was not a sun, not yet, but it was what the sun had once been before it burned. A promise, a beginning. Senna stood still as the constellation wrapped itself into a spiral. At its center hovered a single golden core, small, steady, pulsing in perfect rhythm with the ember in her chest. She reached toward it. The ember responded, sending out a thread of soft firelight that touched the golden core. When the two met, something clicked, not a sound, but a sensation like a long-locked door opening from the inside. The spiral expanded. Light poured from the center, not as heat, not as brightness, but as belonging. It bathed the sky in warm tones never seen beneath the veil, a hues of peach, gold, and deep morning blue. Senna's feet no longer touched the stairs. She was standing in light made from memory, suspended in a truth the world had chosen to forget. And for a moment, the sky held its breath, waiting, trusting. And then the flame spoke, not in words, but in recognition of her journey, of her courage, of her choice. Part 22. The moment the sky blinked. The sky blinked. Not in darkness, not in silence, but in light. For just a heartbeat, the entire veil pulsed, as if remembering how to open its eyes. The clouds, once frozen in place for lifetimes, stirred like great wings stretching after long sleep. Senna felt it ripple through her. The ember in her chest surged gently, not with fire, but with recognition. The flame she carried wasn't here to burn away the veil. It was here to remind it how to breathe. Below her, the world shimmered. Villages lit by lanterns tilted their heads upward. Gardens glowed a little brighter. The wind, Rael wind, began to curl through long-still forests, carrying songs trapped for centuries in leaves that had never fallen. Above her, the great spiral of stars folded inward, becoming smaller, denser, brighter, until it settled into the golden core once more, and that light drew slowly down toward her open hands. She didn't flinch. The ember accepted it. The warmth spread. She was no longer holding the flame. She was the flame, a living memory of the sky's first morning, not burning, not consuming, but becoming. And far below, something changed. For the first time in an age, the horizon blushed. A soft line of gold touched the edge of the world, not full sunrise, not yet, but the beginning of one. Part 23. The first petal of morning. It was barely there at first. A soft golden hue blooming at the edge of the sky, like a single petal unfolding in silence. Not bright, not sudden, just enough to change the shape of the light. Senna hovered between breath and awe. She didn't fall. She didn't rise. She remained suspended in the quiet cradle of the veil, her chest warm with the ember light, her eyes wide with stillness. Below her, the world responded. The lakes, once mirror smooth, began to ripple, not from wind, but from invitation. The trees shimmered, their leaves no longer just silver but tinged with green that had slept for centuries. And in the gardens, lanterns began to dim, not because they were fading, but because they were no longer needed. The light was returning. Senna drifted downward, slowly, her feet touching the staircase once more. The starlit steps held her gently, now more solid, more real, no longer woven of memory alone. As she descended, each step left a faint trail of light behind her, like morning dew catching the first breath of day. She didn't speak. The sky didn't ask her to, but as she stepped from the final stair and touched ground again, she felt a presence in the air. A quiet voice, ancient and soft. Thank you. It came not from above, but from within the world, and it meant everything. Part 24. The day that didn't end the dusk. The glow on the horizon deepened, spreading gently across the sky like ink dropped into still water. But the twilight did not vanish. It simply made space. Daylight, or something close to it, arrived not as a conqueror, but as a companion. Senna stood still beneath a sky that had never held more than shadowed color. Now, it cradled a blend of soft gold and deep lavender, two lights woven together like a song in harmony. This was not the end of the Ember Veil. It was its awakening. She walked, not down a path, but across a field that had once seemed colorless. Now she could see it had always been filled with faint green and gentle blues, waiting. The world had not died. It had simply dimmed. And now, with the ember's return, it remembered how to open its eyes. As she passed beneath the branches of old trees, birds stirred, not in song, but in movement. Creatures that had only known stillness shifted in the brush, testing the air as if unsure what this new light meant. Senna whispered softly, "It's all right." She wasn't speaking to them alone. She was speaking to the land, to herself, to the part of the world that had feared light would undo what twilight had protected. But both could exist. Neither had to disappear, because this was not a sunrise. This was a world learning to be whole again. Part 25. When the lanterns chose to rest. In the village of Lorien, where Senna had once watched the unmoving sky and dreamed of the sun, the lanterns still burned. But softer now, their flames, once the only light in an unchanging world, flickered with something like relief, as if they'd kept their vigil faithfully and were now being told, "You may rest." Senna walked slowly through the village paths. The glowvine curtains swayed gently in the breeze, a real breeze, threading through the alleyways with quiet wonder. Doors creaked open, faces peeked out, eyes blinked against the shifting colors overhead. They didn't cheer, they didn't gasp, they simply watched. Watched as the sky changed in the smallest ways, the clouds drifting, the horizon glowing, the dusk giving way not to night, but to something new. Children stood at the edge of the lake, pointing at the glint of sunlight touching the surface for the first time in generations. And at the far end of the hill, where the old pedestal waited, Senna found the lantern she'd once tended. It was still there, still burning. She knelt beside it, cradled the glass in her hands. "Thank you," she whispered. The flame inside flickered, and quietly, gently, it went out. Not extinguished, released. The lantern would no longer need to hold what the sky could now remember. Part 26. The star petals return. It began with a shimmer in the air. Senna looked up, sensing it before she saw it, a faint silver glimmer drifting from the clouds above, slow and quiet, like a sigh from the sky itself. Then came another, and another. Star petals. Once, they had fallen every dusk, gentle flakes of light that drifted down like snow, marking the passage of time in a world without change. But as the veil had stilled, the star petals had faded, their rhythms lost to the hush. Now, they returned, not in torrents, not in a storm, but in small, delicate spirals. As if testing the air, villagers stepped from their homes. Children lifted their hands, and the petals landed gently on hair and shoulders, glowing faintly, then fading into warmth. Senna let one rest on her palm. It pulsed once, like a heartbeat, then vanished. She smiled. It was different now, not a signal of routine, but a gift. Not a clock, but a celebration. The petals didn't fall from some distant star. They fell from the memory of movement, from the sky remembering how to change. A soft bell rang in the distance, not alarm, not warning, but welcome. And as the petals continued to fall, slow and shimmering, Senna turned toward the village square. The people were gathering, not because they'd been told to, but because they felt it. Something was beginning, something they could shape together. Part 27. The Gathering Beneath the Dusk. Twilight gathered gently overhead, but it no longer felt like a ceiling. It felt like a dome of possibility, soft and vast, gently stirred by a sky that was learning to move again. Senna stood in the village square, surrounded by quiet faces. Not solemn, not fearful, just listening. Some sat on stone benches. Others leaned on lantern posts, now dimmed by choice. The elder, a woman whose voice had once led lullabies during the still years, stood beside Senna and nodded. "You brought it back," she whispered. Senna shook her head. "I remembered it. The world did the rest." Above them, the star petals continued to drift, swirling in soft spirals like the breath of forgotten seasons. The air shimmered faintly, tinged with warmth that hadn't been felt in generations. One by one, the villagers stepped forward, not to praise her, but to offer a ribbon, a flower, a stone carved with a name. Tiny gifts, each placed gently at the base of the pedestal where the lantern had once stood. It became a circle, a ring of memory, of thanks, a beginning. Senna placed her own offering last, her grandmother's journal, now worn and creased, but full. She placed it at the center. The sky above flickered gold, and a soft breeze curled around the circle like a sigh from the trees. They didn't call it a ceremony. It had no title, no end. It was simply what happened when people chose to remember together. Part 28. The Breath Between Moments. That night, if it could still be called night, the village did not sleep. Not in the usual way. No one rang the bell that signaled stillness. No lanterns were lit along the garden paths. And yet, no fear stirred in anyone's chest. They simply rested. Some leaned against cool stones. Some curled beneath glowvine arches. Others laid in the grass beside the mirror lake, eyes turned upward. The stars above pulsed gently. Not bright, not distant, just present. Senna sat on the observatory steps, arms wrapped around her knees. The ember within her no longer throbbed with urgency. It breathed, slow and steady, like a story that no longer needed to rush toward its ending. She listened, not to voices, not to wind, but to the pause, the quiet between everything, between the petals falling, between a glance and a smile, between dusk and dawn. It wasn't empty. It was full of meaning. She thought of her journey, of Mirenholt's stillness, the whisperroot flame, the bridge that wasn't there, the echo of her grandmother's voice, the stars that called her name. None of it had shouted. None of it had demanded. It had all waited, patiently, for someone to hear. Now, as she breathed in that space between moments, Senna realized something simple. The world had not needed saving. It had only needed to be remembered. And now, it was beginning to remember itself. Part 29. The Colors with No Name. Morning came without ceremony. No trumpet of light. No blaze across the horizon. Just a slow, steady shift in the sky's hue, like water being warmed by a hidden fire. Senna opened her eyes to colors she had no names for. The sky wore soft gold layered with violet blue, streaked with something between rose and flame. The clouds had begun to move again, but not in lines or shapes. They danced, drifting with intention, as though painting the air for those willing to notice. The villagers watched in silence, some with tears, others with faint smiles, like children meeting a long-lost friend. One girl pointed upward and asked, "What do we call that one?" Senna followed her gaze. A single band of color rippled through the clouds, not orange, not pink, not even quite light. It moved more like feeling than hue. Senna smiled softly. "I don't think it needs a name," she said. And the girl nodded, satisfied. Not everything needed to be explained. Some things were meant to be witnessed. A warmth spread through the valley as more of the land began to wake. The garroot swayed in rhythm with the clouds. The stones shimmered faintly beneath the soil, like old stories retelling themselves with light. Even the trees, silent watchers for centuries, had begun to bloom, pale blossoms unfolding as if called back from dreams. And through it all, the ember in Senna's chest remained steady, not as a guide now, but as part of her breath, a light she no longer carried, but was. Part 30. what the trees remembered. Senna wandered into the forest's edge, where the trunks of the ancient duskwood stood tall and still as they always had. Except now, something had changed. The trees were listening again. She could feel it in the way the bark warmed beneath her fingertips, the way the leaves tilted to catch both light and memory. These were the same trees that had once guarded silence, that had held stillness like a secret. Now, they whispered, not in words, in memories. Senna closed her eyes and placed both palms on the nearest trunk. The ember in her chest pulsed gently, syncing with a rhythm that had been slumbering for generations. A rush of images filled her mind. Not visions, feelings. The soft fall of starlight on young roots. The laughter of travelers who had once passed beneath the branches. The hush of wind weaving lullabies through leaves. And, buried deep, the sadness of years where no one came. When the trees stood watch in endless twilight, forgotten by the world they once sheltered. But now, the light had returned. The trees welcomed it, not with fanfare, but with grace. A nearby sapling, once curled tight against the earth, reached upward. Its first leaf unfurled in the new light, shimmering faintly in a color somewhere between jade and gold. Senna smiled. Even the forest, ancient and patient, had waited for this moment. And now, it was remembering how to grow. Part 31. The river that sang itself awake. Senna followed the forest path until she heard it, soft at first, like the rustle of distant leaves. But it grew clearer with each step, until it formed a sound she hadn't heard in her lifetime. Running water. She crested a mossy hill and found it below, a river, wide and winding, its surface catching light like glass warmed from within. The water shimmered with threads of pale blue, soft amber, and something that pulsed faintly, not a glow, but a rhythm. The river was singing, not in words, in remembering. Its current hummed with a melody that twisted between joy and stillness, like a lullaby rediscovered. As Senna approached the banks, she noticed the trees lean toward it, their roots curling just shy of the edge, listening. The river hadn't always been still, but in the long hush of the veil, it had grown silent, frozen not by ice, but by pause. Now, with light moving once more, it had begun to flow again. Senna dipped her fingers into the current. The water was cool and bright and alive. It tugged at her gently, as if to say, "I'm awake now. Come with me." She sat for a while and simply listened. The stones beneath the surface glimmered faintly, shaped by the weight of memory. Tiny creatures darted between shadows, stirring ripples that caught colors not yet named. The river sang for them, too. It sang for everyone who had waited. And in its voice, Senna heard the echo of something beautiful. The world no longer feared movement. It welcomed it. Part 32. The island that drifted closer. Senna remained by the river until the sunlight stretched farther than she'd seen before, touching treetops, warming moss, awakening birdsong. But it wasn't until she looked out over the valley that she noticed something new. An island, floating, not high like the citadels of legend, but just above the tree line, slow, steady, and real. It hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had always been there, just too far to see, too still to believe in. Now, it was drifting closer. Senna climbed a nearby ridge for a clearer view. The island moved with grace, carried not by wind or engine, but by something deeper, an ancient current of sky and memory. Upon its surface she could see trees, some blooming with strange white blossoms, others silver and still. There were ruins, too, half covered in vines, shaped like gates and rings. The people of Lorien gathered behind her, their eyes wide. None spoke, but many held their breath, as though exhaling might scare it away. The island stopped above the lake, casting a soft reflection on the water. Then, with the quiet creak of something long asleep, a bridge unfurled from its edge, a slender arc of woven light and root. It did not touch the ground. It waited. Senna stepped forward. The ember in her chest pulsed once, not as a warning, but as a welcome. This was not just a place. It was an arrival, a piece of the world that had been waiting to rejoin the rest. And now it was ready. Part 33. The garden that waited above. The bridge held her weight like silk spun from stone. Each step pulsed beneath Senna's feet, not with sound, but with memory, like the island was greeting her, recognizing the ember she carried. When she reached the top, the air changed. It wasn't colder, just quieter. The kind of quiet that holds breath, not fear. And in the center of the floating isle, where ruins crumbled softly into moss, lay a garden unlike any she'd ever seen. It was both wild and tended. Flowers bloomed in spirals, vines curled into unreadable script, and trees bent their branches not toward the sky, but inward, as if listening to the soil itself. At the heart of the garden stood a pedestal. Simple, stone, unmarked, except for a single shape carved deep into its surface. A circle, unbroken, complete. Senna stepped closer, and the flame in her chest stirred, not flickering, but reaching. She touched the stone, and warmth rose from beneath her fingers, like a breath exhaled after a very long sleep. From behind, wind rustled through the garden, petals lifted, leaves danced, and then light bloomed. Not bright, not loud, just true. The garden glowed with the soft gold of a waking sun, and for a moment, the sky above opened fully. Dusk did not vanish, but morning stood beside it, balanced, whole. This garden had not been forgotten. It had been waiting for the world to be ready. Part 34. The echoes of those who waited. The garden grew still, not in silence, but in reverence, as if the island itself had drawn a breath and was holding it gently between heartbeats. Senna stood at the pedestal, the warmth of the stone still humming through her palm. The ember in her chest shimmered, then pulsed once, sending a faint ripple of light outward across the island. And then they appeared. Figures. Not solid, not ghostly, but woven of shimmer and breath, like memories the world had chosen to keep. They stood beneath trees and among flowers, seated on low stones and leaning against time-worn arches. Some were tall, cloaked in robes stitched from mist. Others were children, or elders, or simply faces she could not place, but all of them watched her with eyes that saw through time. One stepped forward, a woman with long, silver hair and a calm gaze. Her voice reached Senna without sound. We waited because the world needed to forget. Senna said nothing, but the ember within her flickered, not in protest, but in understanding. The woman continued. We were not lost. We were planted, like seeds, sleeping until the sky remembered how to weep and laugh again. The other echoes nodded, glowing softly. You carry the flame now, she said. Not to burn, to remind. Senna felt tears at the edge of her eyes, but didn't wipe them away. They weren't from sadness. They were from belonging. Part 35. The flame that asked nothing. The echoes faded like breath into twilight, leaving behind only warmth. In the earth, in the petals, in the space Senna now stood. No farewell, no final words, just presence. She sat by the pedestal, her fingers brushing through grass that shimmered with morning dew. The ember in her chest no longer pulsed urgently. It simply was, steady and calm, like a candle content not to be noticed. It asked nothing, no task, no duty, only that she carry it forward, not as a burden, but as a part of who she had become. Senna thought of her village, of the lantern she once tended every night, of her grandmother's quiet voice, of the stories that lived in stillness, of the journey that had brought her to ruins that bloomed and rivers that sang. All of it, every step, every silence, had brought her here, not to light the world on fire, but to help it remember. A wind stirred the trees above, gentle, grateful, and from somewhere behind her, a new light flickered, not gold, not blue, but something in between. She turned to see a young sapling rising beside the pedestal, its leaves aglow, its roots threading softly through the stone. She reached out and touched it. The flame responded, not with heat, but with memory. The sapling leaned toward her hand, and in that moment, Senna knew. This was not the end of her journey. It was the start of someone else's. Part 36. The Seeds Beneath the Veil. Senna stood, her hand still resting on the newborn sapling. Its glow faded gently into the morning mist, as if shy of its own light. Yet she could feel it, the quiet strength curling deep into the earth. The ember responded in kind, not with power, but with promise. She wandered beyond the pedestal garden, where stone paths crumbled into moss and vines wrapped ancient arches in silence. But in every crack, something green stirred. Tiny shoots, slender stems, whispers of life once paused, now reaching upward, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. The island had been asleep, but it had dreamed, and in its dreams, it had planted seeds. Senna knelt by one, a violet bloom just beginning to open. She placed her palm beside it, and the ground beneath warmed slightly, the way a memory glows when remembered with love. The flower turned its face toward her, and she smiled. Far across the sky, other islands hovered in the distance, dim shapes against the veil, unmoving for now. But she could feel them, listening, watching, waiting, not for her, but for the light within her to reach them, not with force, not with command, but with remembrance. She whispered, "You're not forgotten." And somewhere beneath her feet, the soil answered. The seeds were waking. The veil was ready to bloom again. Part 37. The Sky That Learned to Bloom. The island garden exhaled. It wasn't a sound, but a feeling like the soft release of tension after a long-held breath. Above, the sky rippled with gentle motion, clouds unfurling like petals on an unseen tree. Senna looked up and saw it happening. The sky was blooming, not with stars, not with storms, but with color, gentle and strange, hues that shifted as you looked at them, never quite settling, like feelings with no single name. Amber dissolved into lavender. Slate curved into rose. In between it all, threads of light curled through the air, trailing from floating seeds, not falling, but rising. The petals of the veil. Long ago, the sky had locked itself to protect the world from too much change. But now, it remembered the beauty of becoming. Senna stood at the edge of the garden, her gaze drawn to where the sky met the horizon. Other islands hovered there, not drifting yet, but shimmering faintly as though deciding. The flame in her chest pulsed. She raised her hand slowly. One by one, soft lights answered from distant places, not bright, not loud, but steady. Echoes of others like her. Other embers. Other rememberers. She was not alone. She had never been. And now, as the sky unfolded like a flower above them all, Senna understood. Twilight had not ended. It had expanded, and in doing so, it had made space for morning to bloom beside it. Part 38. The Lanterns That Carried Names. That evening, if evening still meant what it once had, the villagers gathered once more beneath the open sky, not because they were asked, but because something in the air called to them. Senna returned to Lorien as the first dusk lanterns began to glow, not out of necessity, but out of tradition. Each one flickered with soft firelight, but this time, they carried something new. Names, handwritten, carved, whispered onto slips of paper tied with ribbon. Names of ancestors, of friends, of those who had waited. Each lantern now held a piece of someone, not as loss, but as light. And when they were lifted into the air, they did not drift like before. They rose and turned toward the floating islands. One by one, the lanterns arced upward, as if drawn toward something old and sacred. Trails of golden flame curled behind them, not fading but weaving into the sky like threads in a great tapestry. Senna lit her own lantern. She tied no note, spoke no words. She simply placed her palm over its glass. The ember inside her flickered in answer, and the lantern lifted. As it rose, she felt it. Not grief, not farewell, but something deeper. Continuance. The sky above shimmered with dozens, then hundreds of lanterns, drifting like stars that had remembered their way home. Each one carried a name, and now so did the sky. Part 39. The light that made room for shadows. The lanterns faded into the night, their glow gently absorbed into the ever-changing sky. And though the twilight remained, it no longer felt like a veil. It felt like a choice. Senna stood beneath the trees as the soft hush of the world settled once more. But this time, it was not the hush of stillness. It was the hush of peace. The light in her chest, once pulsing with purpose, now beat with a different rhythm, steady, quiet, content. And with it came a truth she hadn't expected. Not everything needed to shine. Some things, like the shadows between lanterns, the quiet corners of the woods, the pause between two heartbeats, were not meant to be lit. They were meant to be held. The new dawn that edged the horizon didn't erase the dusk. It stood beside it. Senna walked along the lakeshore, watching how the moonlight and morning gold reflected side by side. Neither swallowed the other. They blended, danced, shared, and she understood. True light didn't conquer darkness. It made room for it. A child walked beside her, holding a tiny lantern without a flame. "Will this still work?" the girl asked. Senna knelt, placing her hand around the glass. "No flame," she said, "but still light." The lantern glowed softly, and the girl beamed. Sometimes, what the world needs is not brilliance, but the kindness to let every part of it belong. Part 40. The world that remembered itself. Morning came again, not with trumpets or triumph, but with quiet certainty, like a familiar hand returning to yours. The sky was not fixed. The veil had not vanished, but now it moved, breathed, shimmered with life, not in spite of stillness, but because of it. Senna stood at the hill's edge, where it all began. Below, the village stirred with gentle rhythm, gardens waking, laughter threading through windows, songs without instruments humming in the air. High above, the floating island hovered no longer in waiting, but in welcome. And the ember? Still within her, but no longer separate. She was not a flamebearer now. She was part of the flame, the remembering, the song, the story that no longer needed retelling because it was once again being lived. She turned as the wind shifted. Other lights moved on the horizon, figures walking new paths, distant embers answering her own. Not in mimicry, in harmony. They had found their own gardens, their own steps, their own skies. The world was not returning to what it was. It was becoming what it had always longed to be. Alive, balanced, awake. Senna smiled. She took one breath more, and with it, the world sighed softly, as if it had, at last, remembered itself. End of Whispers of the Ember Veil.